So I started playing guitar like 20 years ago, like 6-string guitar, 20 years, 2 decades, too long. I should be way better than I am by now. But even back then when I first picked up my first 6-string guitar, there was always part of me that really wanted to play bass. I'd seen the Off the Map concert by Red Hot Chili Peppers. Flea absolutely blew my mind. They're an incredible band. That show, Off the Map, is amazing. But Flea particularly absolutely rocked it. I'm very, very glad that I have been playing normal 6-string guitar for the last couple of decades. It's been incredible. No complaints whatsoever. But I've always had that little inkling, that little itch, where I'm thinking, oh, I really want to scratch that bass itch. So it's always been there, and it wasn't until start of last year, so January 2021, when I got my first bass guitar. Just decided to treat myself to this. This is a obviously bright orange Fender Player Series Jaguar bass. I've always also wanted a Jaguar shaped guitar, and I love orange. It's my favourite colour, so this was just an absolute no-brainer. It's just super cool, and playing it really just drove home for me exactly how different bass is to guitar. There are things that you can play on bass that if you played them on guitar would be unbelievably boring. In fact, let me give you an example. Best example for this is the bass line to Queen of California by John Mayer. On guitar, I would just refuse to play this, but on bass, there's something about it which is just much more physically embodied than guitar. I just find it's just something to do with how the bass sits and what your both hands doing. But the bass line to this is just so simple, and I love it. There's just something about bass. And obviously it took ages for me to build up calluses and strength in my right hand to be able to play bass for long enough to actually improve at all. And I'm happy. I'm happy with how it's all progressing. But the other aspect of bass that I found really interesting over the last couple of years has been not just learning how to play and how to approach it, but also just learning a bit more about the different types of bass. So the reason why I actually went for this particular bass as opposed to a P bass or a jazz bass, and I'll get onto those in a bit, is because this is technically both. So this is a precision bass pickup, and this is a jazz bass pickup. They have two completely different tones. So the idea with this was it's a case of it's not just a P bass, it's not just a jazz bass. It does both. I can switch between them. Maybe it's not as good at either of them as a dedicated jazz or precision bass would be themselves, but it can do it. It can do it. So that's why I really wanted to go for this. It's just a really good instrument. These Player Series guitars, if you're in the market for like a mid-range guitar, it's about 600 quid. The Fender Player Series, you can get them in basically all different shapes and sizes, are wicked. They're really good, solid instruments. So this is really versatile. You know, it's got the ability to be a rock bass, sort of have that sort of more crunchy tone with the P bass pickup, and it's got the jazz pickup on there as well to have a bit more of the kind of like the deader, smoother sound. But it's also got round wound, just normal round wound strings on here. And if you remember from my last video, which I think about 10 people in the world watched, you can make a lot of difference to the tone of a bass by choosing which strings are on there. So this is like two different flavours of bass in one. Now, you may remember from my last video that I experimented with this acoustic bass, and in that video I took the phosphor bronze round wound strings that were on this that were very bright, and in fairness, looking back, were pretty buzzy. There was quite a lot of fret buzz going on there. And I decided to replace them with these lovely black satin finish nylon tape wound strings. So the idea is that this would be really smooth. And basically, the way to look at it would be that if the bronze strings that were on this kind of gave it a bit more of a precision bass feel and sound, these should give it a much more jazz bass sound. Now, the outcome of that video was that these were the wrong gauge and that it messed up the whole action. There was loads of just fret, not even fret buzz, but fret slap. It was just awful. I'm pleased to say that I took this to a luthier guitar tech last night, and he immediately looked at it and went, yeah, cool, your neck is bending backwards a little bit, which is fine. So he just adjusted the truss rod and it now is perfect. There was an extra little buzz that was happening. And it was happening on like the F sharp. That's not it, that's just me not fretting properly. It was happening on the F sharp, and it was something was rattling a little bit. And it was sort of like tapping on there to try and hear it. And I'm like, is there a loose brace inside? Because there's bracing inside the guitar. What is this? And I thought, okay, well maybe I just didn't put the pins back in, and maybe the ends of the strings are like rattling around a bit. Took the strings back off a bit and put them back in. Not that. Turns out it was the battery inside the battery compartment, slightly loose and just rattling a bit. So what we've done is just put a bit of foam in there. Just put a bit of foam, it's fine. And that then means that it just doesn't rattle. So this has got a really lovely kind of woody sound to it. Very, very happy. It's very, very smooth. It's a bit kind of double bassy, but still very much it's kind of its own thing. So that's flavour number 2. And flavour number 3 is this thing, which is probably the coolest guitar I own at the moment. I'll be completely honest. This is absolutely wild. So I've mentioned before that, by the way, I keep on tucking in this shirt because I don't normally wear a shirt. I wore this for work and thought, I look like a history professor. I'll just keep this on for the video. But I forgot that when you sit down, you can then see a little window into my belly. So you don't want to see that. Maybe you do want to see that. So I mentioned before that I love going down to Denmark Street, and in particular the basement area of Wonjo Guitars is their lovely little bass section. And I saw this guitar a couple of months ago, just hanging on the wall, and thought, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. It's a Vox Panther. I didn't buy it that first time that I was there, but I did then go back a couple of weeks later and bought it, and they gave me a fantastic deal, and it's where the whole conversation that I had with the member of staff there about the nylon tape wound strings and things, which I mentioned in my last video. I got this. Now, I don't know if you can tell. Let's compare the neck size between these. It's a bit of a fisheye lens, so you might not be able to tell, but these are unbelievably different sized necks. This is basically a toy. Apparently the idea is that this was made in the 60s when Vox passed its manufacturing over to a company called EKO, an Italian company. So they passed it over to them, and they wanted to produce instruments as cheaply as possible. So I think the idea was, hey, let's use as little wood as we possibly can to make this thing, which is why it's tiny. It's super short scale as well. This fits into a normal guitar bag, whereas things like this and the acoustic bass are massive. Their scale length is really, really long, and the strings are really, really close together, and it looks wicked. It's all like hanging apart. Like, that's just wild. This is completely rusted to hell. You can tell that the tuning pegs are all different. So this has really had an interesting life, and I just love it. I have a real problem with vintage guitars in that a lot of sort of vintage guitars are just normal guitars, and they've got they're really valuable because they're old, and once you get one, you can't really do anything with it. You can't even really play them that often because it would be ruining sort of like a piece of history. I want to have guitars that I can play. I'm sure I'll do a whole video on vintage guitars, why not? But the idea with this is that, yes, this is vintage, it's made in the 60s, but it's fucked. And it's not like sacred. It's vintage, but it's not sacred. So I can do stuff to this. I can restore this, I can change it, I can do all sorts of things. but it's just vibes. And crucially, this has got flat wound strings. So let's compare this to these strings again. So you can see on this one, we've got the round wound strings. The strings themselves, I'm not sure how well that's going to show up, but the strings themselves are, it is a tube going down the core, and it's got another tube wrapped around it. So it's bumpy. That's where you can get like that's where you get that fret noise. Whether you move your finger across it, there is just friction. These strings, there are no such bumps. You know, it is a tube wrapped with a flat, like a noodle, like a bit of tagliatelle. There you go. It's an Italian guitar. These strings also lend it a bit more of a sort of a deader, jazzier tone. So we've got, from all of these, the only thing that we don't have is a fretless bass. One day I'll get a fretless bass. But in terms of this, we've got at one end, this guy can do rock, crunchy rock bass tones and a bit of jazz. This does fully jazz. Whoa! You stay there. You stay there. Oh my goodness. This. What was I doing? This does fully jazz tones. It's just really, really smooth. And this is kind of even jazzier, but because it's acoustic, it's sort of got a bit more of that kind of sort of acousticy, woody tone. You know, it sounds like there's a big empty box attached to it, which is exactly what it is. So those for me, apart from a fretless, are the three flavours of bass that you can have. And if you want, this is basically a justification for why you should have more than one bass. There are other things that you can go for. There are 5-string basses, there are 6-string basses. Maybe one day I'll get a 5-string. They kind of intimidate me a little bit. But yeah, 5 strings and fretless basses are a whole other realm, and they're very, very cool. The other thing, not just from a point of view of tone, in terms of like aesthetics, the other aspect to all these is that when you're recording, for example, I'm told that it's much better if you can record using a flat wound bass, because obviously recording picks up absolutely everything about your performance. There's nowhere to hide. So without there being any of that fret noise moving in between notes, it just makes those performances just a little bit more clean, I suppose, is the idea. So I'm gonna play a tune, and we're gonna compare what all of these three sound like, and then I will let you get on with the rest of your day. If you enjoyed this, please do leave a like, and if you're new here, please subscribe. I do all different sorts of things, but I post a main channel video every Wednesday, so enjoy.